Hey, and welcome. A little bit chilly in here for some reason. Anyway, today I know it's a day or two ahead, but I wanted to make a kind of a bit of a tribute video to all the men and women in service, uh, vets in general, and all, law enforcement, military, uh, Coast Guard, the whole works of the armed forces. Now, the the thing is there's a lot of things, like there's just so much history that Canada has been involved with that you can't really put it down into one thing. You just can't. So you can only say thank you. Now, people who follow my channel are probably saying, "Hey, dude, aren't you like anti-war? Aren't you like you're always trying to say how do we avoid this war, or World War III, or whatever?" Yes, I am. One of those people that believe that if we can avoid horrible atrocities and disasters, to me that's just common sense. Does that mean I'm pro-war or anti-war? Well, for me, it's not so much pro-war or anti-war. It's, of course I'm anti-war, of course. But I also understand why we need military. I'm not one of those people that are like, cut the budget of the military because this. I'm kind of the opposite. I believe in, like, for example, regular civilians with training to have, like, machine guns in their houses as a huge domestic, conscript army to protect their borders. Kind of like the Switzerland idea. But a little bit different, So I'm huge for that, preservation, kind of like a Canadian Sparta, but in modern days, a very polite Sparta, can you please get off my land, eh? Like that kind of thing, and we do have stuff like that. For example, the 3rd Canadian Rangers up north, they still patrol with 303 Britishes. Now they're more search and rescue and polar bear patrol, I guess. But they still use the venerable, pushing 100 years old 303 British. I mean, a rifle with a lot of history to Canada, going way back. In fact, one of our very first kind of overseas conflicts, not the first, I don't think, but one of the very first and one of the biggest wars that we were involved in, a lot of people long forgot it. And again, a lot of history here is the Boer War. I mean, Canadians served in the Boer War. And they probably would have had a Lee Enfield Mark I, I guess, at that time. Maybe even possibly still firing muskets. It's hard to say. I can't, I'd have to research that again. And then, of course, there's World War I, World War II. A lot of people probably don't know. Canadians and Belgians and the French were the first to get, gassed in 1915. Chlorine gas from the Germans. Canadians were first to experience that. Again, so am I anti-war? I would never want anybody to experience that. But I also do understand that there's over 25,000 recorded wars in history, and obviously there's still, history's still being made as we speak. So if the time arises and we do need people to step forward to protect, the innocent, protect their, their borders or whatever, you have to admire the people that do this. You have to look at it kind of, okay, maybe you don't agree with the politics or whatever, but you do value human life. So to send somebody to go do something, a nasty job like that, knowing that they could be killed in the process, I think that takes a very special person. So I got something here. Again, like there's just so many, you got the guys in Afghanistan, and a lot, we have that. There's no active battle groups in Afghanistan right now, but I think there's still something like 500 training guys and stuff like that, and there's support. And then plus there's all over the place. We have about 13 major air bases here in Canada, and then we've got, probably about 25 to 30,000 troops, and probably about 300,000 personnel in the armed forces all total here in Canada. It varies from year to year, kind of depending on the budget. We now have, although it was a very tough road to get a submarine in the water, but we now got submarines again. We used to have one of the largest militaries in the world. A lot of people don't know that, particularly in the 1950s. We were very, very, very large. Right out of World War II, we were probably, I think, the 3rd largest, 4th largest military. At one point, we were the 6th largest military. Now, we're, I think, like 17th or something like that. But it's not, one thing about that, and this is something that you'll hear from other soldiers around the world about Canadians. They're the best soldiers in the world. There's just not enough of them. One thing the Russians didn't like the idea during the Cold War of fighting Canadians is that They're sneaky bastards. They're always trying to trick you. They never follow their field manuals, so they didn't like the idea of that. In World War I, World War II, they always said the Australians and the Canadians were the worst to fight because they fought like, a bunch of savages. They were just, completely brutal. I'm not saying other people didn't fight hard, but they always said the Canadians and Australians fought the hardest. Like it was just, they just, well, I guess they just like to fight. But a lot of people also don't know, like in World War II, there was a lot of people, we did serve very limited in Japan as well, and we had a lot of POWs there. And we had some kind of disastrous effects in Japan. It was a total different enemy that we weren't prepared for, but we fought the good fight there. A lot of people don't know that. Most people know that we were in Europe for the most part. There's also Cyprus, and there's also the peacekeepers in Somalia. I mean, that has its controversy too. So as you can see, like like the things like Juno Beach and D-Day and stuff like that we took part of. Those were kind of the glorious. But then, of course, there's the disaster at Dieppe. I mean, what a disaster! I mean, you couldn't have asked for a worse place to land. And people still to this day ask, why would they have, who could be that strategically, out to lunch to think that was a good place to land a bunch of guys? About 1,000 died and about 2,000 were taken prisoner there. Out of about 5,000 Canadians, that was a big disaster and it was one of the first kind of showcases for the Canadian, army in the Second World War. On frontline combat, and it was a complete disaster, and it was a massacre, is what it was. Now people, all these years later, ask, and what it seems to be is that it was actually intentional. This is the kind of sacrifice that you had back then. Is they basically were going after an Enigma code machine type of thing, is what they believe it was. It wasn't a successful raid, while the main, it was basically a big distraction, and that, I mean, the loss of life. I mean, the Germans must have been just sitting there going, why are they landing here? Like this is the most fortified position. And it wasn't even really that heavily protected. There's only a few gun positions that were up there. It wasn't like, fortified to beyond belief. If you look at Dieppe and how it was laid out, there's not a lot there. It was just so easy to, I mean, you had a big natural barrier there. You had, like a cliff that was a couple of 100 feet tall. I mean, again, I don't know how they were going to get around this. So the Germans must have been sitting up there going, what's going on? I mean, why are these guys landing here? It had to be kind of one of those things that it baffled everybody. And the poor bastards on the beach, they had to be, there's stories where guys they made it to the wall and they stayed there for a god awful time until they were captured. It was just a slaughter. So why? Well, again, while this was going on, it was the diversion. While there was another ship that went around, and a couple of special forces guys went into a town across from a bank and was supposed to have an Enigma machine, but it didn't. That could have changed the whole world right there. That could have really made a big difference. But that's what the sacrifice was. So to me, I don't look at Dieppe as a blunder so much as it was tragic. I looked at it as a massive sacrifice. And you have to all but, really, what do you say to these people that survived that, other than thank you? That's craziness. Again, so many incidents in World War II. I used to work at the National Aviation Museum in Ottawa, and one of the things there, crawling through some of the old, the Bristol's Bolingbroke, some of these old bombers, the Lancaster. I got to play around with the Lancaster. I nearly released a 500-pound dud bomb on the museum floor one day, but that's a different story altogether. Watch out for coats with long tails. Yeah, they might catch the bomb release. Yeah, me and another guy. But crawling through those old bombers and stuff like that is like the one that really got me was crawling through the B-25 Mitchell. To get from the front of the airplane to the back of the airplane, there was like a crawl space, maybe about overweight people need not apply here. It was just like kind of a top of the bomb bay, and you had to basically slide yourself through, and I did. And I was just like, geez, this would be a horrible place to be in the plane while being shot at. And then I get into the turret, and there's a little thing. I got 2 machine guns here, and I'm looking around like, this would be a horrible place to be in the airplane if we got shot at. Then I went into the tail gun section. Okay, this is kind of cool, but man, this would be a really bad place to be in if you were being shot at. And I sat in the pilot seat and I was like, I got no guns here. This would be a horrible place to be sitting if you were being shot at. And it kind of came to me, there was no safe place in the plane. Also jumped into things like the Spitfires and Mustang and the Hawker Hurricane. I got to sit in all these airplanes, and even some of the training airplanes like the Harvard, stuff like that. The Americans known as the Texan. Same airplane, just, slightly, same design, they just, duplicated slightly differently in different areas. We had over 400 bombers built here in Canada. Of the Lancasters. Also the de Havilland Mosquito. We worked on it one day and we found some signatures from 1944 on a ribbon on the around the tail fin. And got to sit in some of the Nazi superplanes like the Volksjäger, the 162 Salamander. Weird plane. Also got to sit in the 163B Comet. There was two of them at the National Aviation Museum, and sitting in this stuff, even like this is like 50 years later almost. I'm sitting in there, and the residue from the rocket fuel. This was the only rocket-powered interceptor in history, and I was sitting in that, and this stuff would like make your skin itchy. That's how the residue on it, and it's still when they took this airplane apart, they took the wings off of it or whatever to store it. They found some fuel, the fuel tank. They found some markings because these things were made by basically slave labor in the Nazi camps, and it was made by French slave labor. And there was a little rock taped to the fuel tank of the Comet, and it said, "These factory clothes, my heart's not in it." And that was basically somebody hoping that a rough landing from the Comet would explode it or a takeoff or whatever. So it's you see, okay, well, there's another human side of it that it's not just the soldiers that suffered here. There was the civilian losses are way higher than the soldier losses. So there's sacrifice on all sides. So World War II, you can go on forever in a day of all the things that happened there and some of the great raids. And a lot of people might not know this. The first enemy airplanes to be shot down in World War II were by a Canadian in a Mustang B. And it was, I forget the name of the pilot. Our best pilot was Buzz Burling. He had 31 kills, mostly in the Hawker Hurricane. He later died in Israel in a fiery crash in an airplane. So we had guys like that, and then we had all the Navy guys, sinking U-boats off the coast of Newfoundland. There's still some U-boats that got sunk off the coast of Newfoundland. The whole effort was something else in World War II, on its own. But I will get to the story again. This is why I don't want to get too far into depth and all into the history of it, because the thing is that there's just so much of it. World War II is probably the one that most people gravitate toward. But in the next video, I'm going to make a second video here. You can't get it all into one video, so yeah, I'm going to cover some other not so popular wars. Okay, hi and welcome. A little bit chilly in here for some reason. Anyway, today I know it's a day or two ahead, but I wanted to make a kind of a bit of a tribute video to all the men and women in service. Vets in general, and all, law enforcement, military, Coast Guard, the whole works of the armed forces. Now, the thing is there's a lot of things, like there's just so many, so much history that Canada has been involved with that you can't really put it down into one thing. You just can't. So you can only say thank you. Now, people who follow my channel are probably saying, "Hey, dude, aren't you like anti-war? Aren't you like, you're always trying to say, how do we avoid, this war or World War III or whatever?" Yes, I am, one of those people that believe that if we can avoid, horrible atrocities and disasters, to me that's just common sense. Does that mean I'm pro-war or anti-war? Well, for me, it's not so much pro-war or anti-war. It's, of course I'm anti-war, of course. But I also understand why we need military. I'm not one of those people that are like, cut the budget of the military because this. I'm kind of the opposite. I believe in, like, for example, regular civilians with training to have, like, machine guns in their houses as a huge domestic, conscript army to protect their borders. Kind of like the Switzerland idea, but a little bit different. So I'm huge for that. Preservation, kind of like a Canadian Sparta, but in modern days, a very polite Sparta. Can you please get off my land, eh? Like that kind of thing, and we do have stuff like that. For example, the 3rd Canadian Rangers up north, they still patrol with 303 Britishes. Now, they're more search and rescue.